The house smelled like cinnamon and roast beef, the scent filling every corner of my home like a blanket. My dining room table, set meticulously with the finest glasses, linen napkins inherited from my mother, and silver cutlery I only used on special occasions, gleamed under the warm yellow light of the chandelier. Everything had to be perfect. Frank was coming. My son, my pride, the one who had always been there for me. I could still hear his voice in my mind, calling me Mom, the word that once made me feel like the world was still in my hands. The evening was supposed to be a celebration, a chance to bring my family together once again under the roof I had maintained all these years. A small dinner party to remind myself that, at 66, I was still capable of making things right. Before I tell you what happened next, would you do me a favor? Hit that subscribe button, turn on the little bell, and let me know where you're watching from. It really helps us know where these stories are reaching. But what I didn't know as I stood there, adjusting the napkins, was that this gathering would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. I had spent a lifetime trying to keep everything in place, the perfect house, the perfect life, and the perfect son. But tonight, even with everything looking just as it should, there was an unease gnawing at the back of my mind. Frank and Laura arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, as always. Frank, with his expensive bottle of wine. Laura, with her bouquet of white flowers. They both hugged me at the door, her perfume too sweet, too overwhelming. It always irritated me, but I kept it to myself. Laura had always been nice to me, too nice. That easy smile of hers, the one that never seemed to fade, always rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't trust easy smiles. But Frank loved her. And that was all that mattered. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The evening went as planned, dinner was served, polite conversation flowed, and everything appeared fine. We talked about trivial things, the weather, Frank's job, neighbors, the usual small talk. I poured the wine, they complimented the food. And I thought to myself, maybe everything is finally coming together. But just as dessert was served, something shifted. Frank leaned toward Laura and whispered something. I couldn't hear what he said, but I saw her nod slowly, her eyes flicking toward the stairs. Something about that simple glance made my heart skip a beat. Laura excused herself, saying she was going to the bathroom. But instead of heading toward the downstairs bathroom, she moved toward the stairs. A sinking feeling washed over me. I stopped pouring the wine, my hands suddenly frozen. Why was she going upstairs? I tried to push the thought away. I tried to focus on Frank, who was still talking about some new project at work, but my ears were already tuned to the faint sound of Laura's footsteps above. The creak of the floorboards, the soft rustling as she moved down the hall, it was as if the whole house held its breath, waiting for something I couldn't yet name. Minutes ticked by. 10, then 20, then 30. I could no longer pretend that everything was fine. I stood up from the table, murmuring something about getting more coffee. Frank didn't even look at me. He was too busy checking his phone. I walked slowly toward the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the second-floor landing, I saw my bedroom door slightly ajar. I heard muffled sounds coming from inside, the shuffle of something being moved, the scraping of drawers. I stood there for a moment, paralyzed. Part of me wanted to burst in and demand an explanation. Another part, the part of me that had always been too scared to confront the truth, stayed frozen in place. Deep down, I already knew what she was looking for. And I knew that if she found it, everything would fall apart. So, I turned quietly and walked back downstairs, my feet heavy with the weight of the unspoken. I returned to the table, my hands shaking. Frank was still on his phone. I poured him more wine, but the glass felt like it might slip from my hand. He smiled at me, and I smiled back, but the word "Mom" no longer had the warmth it once carried. Instead, it felt like an empty sound, a word that no longer belonged to me. Laura came down 43 minutes later. I counted the seconds, watching the wall clock tick away as I pretended to be engaged in conversation. When she reappeared on the stairs, her face was pale, her hands trembling. I caught the look she shared with Frank, the look that said everything I already feared. She whispered something to him, something that made Frank's face turn ashen, and then he looked at me, not the way he usually did, with that familiar warmth, but as if something had changed in the very core of our relationship. As if he'd just discovered something about me that he could never unlearn. Mom, he said, his voice trembling. We need to talk. I wanted to get up. I wanted to run, to hide, to disappear into the walls of this house. But my legs wouldn't move. I stayed seated, my hands clutching the linen napkin so tightly my knuckles turned white. I felt the world I had built with lies begin to crumble, piece by piece. All because Laura had gone up to my room. All because Frank had whispered something to her that made everything break wide open, and that was just the beginning. The silence that followed Frank's words felt like the weight of the entire house pressing down on me. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, and for the first time in a long time, I was afraid of what was coming, afraid of what Frank and Laura might know. I sat there, staring at my hands in my lap, feeling like a stranger in my own home. The house I had spent so many years building, the family I had carefully crafted, were suddenly crumbling before my eyes. And it was all because of that damn box. Frank's voice broke through the haze of fear and guilt. Mom, he said again, more forcefully this time. We need to talk. I don't understand. What is all this? Why have you been hiding this from me? I looked up at him, at his face twisted in confusion and pain. I wanted to explain, to tell him that it wasn't what he thought, that I had my reasons, but the words were stuck in my throat. How could I explain the unbearable weight of the secret I had carried for so long? How could I explain the boy I had abandoned? The son I had erased from my life, from my memory, to protect my perfect image of a family? Laura, standing beside Frank, was silent. But her expression said everything. Shock. Disbelief. And beneath it, anger at me, anger at the lies I had told. Anger that she was now a part of this tangled mess. The silence stretched between us like an abyss. And in that silence, the truth was suffocating me. Frank dropped the letters onto the table. The sound sharp and unforgiving. The yellowed paper rustled like the ghost of a past I had tried to bury. I couldn't bear to look at them, but I knew I had to. Slowly, I turned my gaze to the pile of forgotten words, the letters from a son I had refused to acknowledge. Frederick, Frank whispered, as if tasting the name for the first time. Who is Frederick, Mom? You always told me I was an only child. I closed my eyes, the memories flooding back like a torrent I could no longer control. The years of pretending, the lies, the guilt that had gnawed at me every single day. Frederick wasn't just a name from the past. He was my son. My firstborn. The one I abandoned when things got too hard, when the screaming and the endless nights of fear and helplessness became too much. He was the one I locked away in a place where I never had to see him again. He's your brother, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Frederick is your brother. The room seemed to spin, the words hanging in the air like a cruel weight. Frank looked at me, his face a mixture of confusion and disbelief. What do you mean he's my brother? He asked, his voice rising, as if he couldn't quite comprehend what I had just said. I know, I said softly. I know. I lied to you. I told you he was gone, but he wasn't. I sent him away when he was 16. To an institution. I thought it was for the best. I thought it would make things easier. But I was wrong. So wrong. Frank stepped back, his face contorting in something between anger and disbelief. You sent him away? Just like that? You never thought to bring him back, to check on him, to write him a single letter? I didn't answer. I couldn't. What could I say? How could I explain the deep, suffocating fear that had driven me to make that choice? How could I explain the shame that still burned inside me every time I thought of Frederick, locked away and forgotten, while Frank and I lived a life of normalcy? A life I had created by pretending he didn't exist. I didn't know what else to do. I finally managed to say, my voice cracking. He was dangerous. He wasn't like you, Frank. He had episodes. He couldn't control himself. Your father and we couldn't handle it. The doctors said it would be best for everyone if he was placed somewhere where they could take care of him. Somewhere safe. Laura shook her head, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. That's not what these papers say, Eleanor, she said, her voice cold. It says he had depression and anxiety. A teenager who needed therapy, not isolation. You didn't even try to help him. You just sent him away. Her words hit me like a slap, but I couldn't argue with them. I had known all along that I had made the wrong choice. But it was easier, wasn't it? It was easier to pretend Frederick didn't exist than to face the reality of the pain I had caused him. The silence stretched again, suffocating, unbearable. Frank was holding one of the letters, staring at it as if he couldn't understand what he was reading. 5 years, Mom. 5 years without a single letter. Not one visit. How could you do that? How could you leave him there? The silence stretched again, suffocating, unbearable. Frank was holding one of the letters, staring at it as if he couldn't understand what he was reading. 5 years, Mom. 5 years without a single letter. Not one visit. How could you do that? How could you leave him there? I wanted to reach out to him, to explain that it wasn't as simple as he thought. That I had done it out of love, out of fear for him, for our family. But the words wouldn't come. The shame was too heavy, the guilt too overwhelming. I had lied to Frank for so long. I had made him believe I was the perfect mother, that we were the perfect family. But the truth was that I wasn't perfect. Far from it. And now, it was all falling apart in front of me. I didn't know what else to do. I whispered again, the words coming out in a rush. I was scared, Frank. I was so scared. I thought I was protecting you. But I wasn't. I just abandoned him. The room was silent for a long time. Frank didn't speak. Laura didn't say a word. And I was left there, standing in the wreckage of my own mistakes, knowing that I could never undo what I had done. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. The silence in the room stretched on, suffocating, as I tried to hold myself together. Frank was still standing, staring at the letters in his hand, his face pale. His eyes, once filled with admiration for me, now held something I couldn't bear to look at: disappointment, betrayal, and a deep, unspoken pain. I could see it in his eyes, the slow unraveling of everything I had built. I had spent years convincing myself that I could keep the family perfect, that I could protect Frank from the messy, painful parts of life. But all of it was falling apart now, in the span of a few breaths. I need to know, Mom, Frank said, his voice shaking, but his words clear. Why didn't you ever tell me? Why didn't you ever let me meet him? Or even just know the truth? I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. How could I explain something I couldn't even explain to myself? How could I tell him the truth, the ugly, painful truth about what I had done, without completely shattering the last remnants of our relationship? Laura was standing by the window, arms crossed, her face a mask of disbelief. Her usual calm, measured demeanor was gone, replaced with something colder, harder. I could see the way she was looking at me now, with judgment, with pity. She wasn't angry, no, it was something worse. She was disappointed in me. And somehow, that hurt more than anything else. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. I couldn't do this. I couldn't face Frank like this, couldn't look him in the eyes and explain the mistakes that had defined my life, that had defined my motherhood. But I had to. I had to finally tell him everything, even if it meant losing him forever. It wasn't just about protecting you, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. It was about protecting myself, too. Frederick, he wasn't like you, Frank. He was different. And I didn't know how to fix him. I didn't know how to make him normal. Your father and I, we tried everything. But we couldn't handle it. And then the doctors? They said it was better for him to be in an institution. They said he'd be safe there. And so I convinced myself it was the right thing to do. I convinced myself that I was doing it for the family, for you. Frank shook his head, his face a mixture of disbelief and hurt. But, Mom, he's still your son. You should have fought for him. You should have at least written to him, called him, visited him. You just shut him out. And you shut me out of it, too. You never let me know the truth. You kept me in the dark. His words hit me like a slap, but they weren't wrong. I had kept him in the dark. I had kept both of them in the dark. And for what? To protect my own fragile sense of control? To pretend that everything was perfect, that nothing could touch the image I had built of our family? I know, Frank, I whispered. I know. And I'm so sorry. I've spent my whole life pretending everything was fine, pretending I was the mother I should have been. But I wasn't. And I've paid for it every day since. I've carried that guilt, that shame, every day of my life. And now it's all come out. Frank's eyes softened, but the hurt was still there. Mom, you can't just pretend this is something that happened years ago. It's not in the past. It's here, it's now. I don't know what to do with all this. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. The weight of his words nearly crushed me. I wanted to reach out to him, to beg for his forgiveness, but I knew deep down that it wasn't that simple. Forgiveness couldn't be handed out just because I said the words. It had to be earned, and I had no idea if I could earn it back. Laura turned away from the window, her expression unreadable. I don't know what to say to you, Eleanor. This isn't just about the lies you've told, it's about the damage you've done. To Frank, to Frederick, to everyone. I don't know how we come back from this. Her words stung, but they were true. The damage had been done, and it couldn't be undone. I had abandoned my son, my flesh and blood, and I had never given him the chance he deserved. I had failed him in every possible way. And now, I was standing here, trying to pick up the pieces of a life I had shattered. I don't expect you to forgive me, Laura, I said quietly. I don't even expect Frank to forgive me. But I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. If he'll let me, I want to find Frederick. I want to tell him that I'm sorry. That I was wrong. Frank looked at me for a long time before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm going to find him, Mom. I'm going to find my brother. And if you want to come with me, you can. But don't think for a second that it's going to fix everything. You can't just show up after 40 years and expect things to be okay. His words were a harsh reminder of the broken trust between us. But there was a part of me that still hoped, still held on to the faintest thread of a chance to heal. Even if it was too late, Frank stood up, pushing his chair back with a force that made the wood scrape across the floor. I'm going to St. Jude's tomorrow, Mom. I need to know if he's still there. I need to know if he's still alive. And just like that, he left the room, leaving me alone with my guilt and my shame. Alone with the truth that had finally come crashing down. The next morning, I woke up with a tightness in my chest, a heaviness I couldn't shake. I had barely slept the night before, tossing and turning with thoughts of Frederick, of the years I had lost with him. The room seemed too quiet, too still. The silence in my house felt like an accusation, every corner of it reminding me of what I had done. Frank didn't speak much when he came to pick me up. His silence, heavy and unyielding, was more painful than anything he could have said. I could feel the distance between us, the emotional chasm that had opened up since the truth came to light. And yet, despite everything, I still had a sliver of hope, a foolish, naive hope, that maybe, just maybe, this trip to St. Jude's could be the first step in fixing what I had broken. But deep down, I knew the truth, that wasn't something I could fix. Not easily. And probably not at all. We drove in silence, the car moving through the streets like a slow procession. The radio remained off, and the only sound was the hum of the engine, the soft tapping of the windshield wipers, the occasional passing car. Frank's face was tight, his jaw clenched, and I could see the anger simmering just beneath the surface. He was still angry, still hurt, and I knew he had every right to be. I had failed him, failed both of them, in ways I couldn't even begin to explain. As we neared St. Jude's, my hands began to shake. The institution loomed ahead, its looming walls and metal gates a grim reminder of the 40 years I had spent pretending Frederick didn't exist. The building, with its faded exterior and institutional air, looked nothing like the place I had imagined it to be. It was cold and impersonal, the kind of place where the forgotten ones were stored away and left to fade into the background of society. Frank pulled into the parking lot, his face a mask of determination. But when he looked at me, there was something softer in his eyes, something that made my chest tighten. I could see the pain he was carrying, the weight of the years he had lost, the years I had stolen from him and his brother. And in that moment, I realized that it wasn't just Frederick who had been affected by my decisions. It was Frank, too. We're doing this for him, Mom, Frank said, his voice steady but tinged with something I couldn't place. For Frederick. He deserves to know the truth. He deserves to have a life. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for him. Don't forget that. I nodded, unable to speak. My throat was tight, constricted by the enormity of the situation. We walked into the building together, Frank's steps confident, mine slow and hesitant. The sterile smell of disinfectant hit me as soon as we stepped inside. It felt like walking into a place where time stood still. The halls were lined with photos of peaceful landscapes, fake flowers and vases, all carefully designed to give the illusion of comfort. But I knew better. This was no place for healing. This was a place where lives were stifled, where people were forgotten. A nurse greeted us at the front desk, her smile professional but distant. She led us down a long hallway, her steps echoing in the silence. My heart pounded in my chest as we neared the end, where the door to Frederick's room stood ajar. When we entered the room, Frederick was sitting by the window, looking out at the garden, a notebook in his hands. He looked up when we entered, his eyes meeting mine with a calmness that only deepened my guilt. He looked so different from the boy I had once known, older, thinner, but still the same in so many ways. His eyes were a mirror of mine, the same honey-colored shade, the same quiet sadness that had always been there. Frank stepped forward first, breaking the silence. "Hi, Frederick," he said softly. "It's me. It's Frank." Frederick blinked, then smiled a small, tentative smile. "Hi, Frank. You came back." I could feel the lump in my throat growing as I stood there, unsure of what to do, unsure of what to say. My son, the son I had abandoned, was here, in front of me, and I couldn't even find the words to apologize, to make up for everything I had done. He turned to me then, and for the first time, his gaze softened. "You're my mom, right?" he asked, his voice slow and careful, like he was unsure if the question was still valid after all these years. I nodded, my chest tight with emotion. "Yes, Frederick. I'm your mom." There was a long pause as Frederick looked at me, searching my face. "I thought you'd never come," he said softly. "I thought you forgot about me." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. How could I have let him believe that? How could I have let him think that he was forgotten, that he didn't matter? "I'm so sorry," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I was wrong. I should have been here. I should have never left you." Frederick looked at me for a moment longer, then slowly turned back to the window. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I'm not mad. I just want to know if you're really going to be here now. Are you?" I didn't have an answer for him. I didn't know if I could fix everything, or even if it was possible to make up for the years I had stolen from him. But I could try. I could start by showing up now, by being there for him in the way I should have been all those years ago, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The stillness in the room was thick, suffocating, as Frederick turned back toward the window, his fingers absently tracing the edge of his notebook. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence between us felt like an ocean, vast and impassable. And for the first time in years, I truly felt the weight of the years I had lost, the time I had stolen from him. The months, the years, the silence, it all stretched out before me like an unbridgeable gap. Frank moved closer to Frederick, sitting beside him on the windowsill. He gave me a brief look, a silent plea for me to follow, to step into this moment with them. I walked slowly, as if the weight of my guilt was physically pulling me back, preventing me from moving forward. "Frederick," Frank said, his voice soft, though his eyes were hard with unshed tears. "We need to talk to you about something. Something we didn't know how to say before, but we have to now. It's time." Frederick, ever so calm, nodded, his gaze never leaving the view of the garden. "What is it?" he asked quietly, as if he had been expecting this conversation for a long time, but not knowing when it would come. I took a deep breath, stepping closer to them. "Frederick," I began, my voice faltering, "I know I've hurt you. And I know that I can't change the past. But I want you to know that I am so sorry. I never should have left you there. I never should have. I never should have let you think you were forgotten." There was a long pause. I could feel my chest tightening, the words getting caught in my throat. I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold back the tears. But I had to say this. I had to tell him the truth, even if it was too late to fix everything. "Mom," Frederick said softly, turning his head toward me now, his eyes not filled with anger or resentment, but something softer, something almost fragile. "You never visited me, did you? Not even once. Not even when I asked. Not even when I wrote to you." I nodded, my throat aching. "I didn't know how," I whispered. "I was so scared, Frederick. I thought I was protecting you, but I wasn't. I was only protecting myself from facing the truth. I couldn't handle what I had done. I couldn't face you, couldn't face myself. Frederick's face didn't show any judgment, just a quiet sadness. He wasn't angry. He didn't shout. He just nodded slowly, like he already understood. "It's okay, Mom," he said, almost in a whisper. "I understand now. I wasn't angry at you anymore. I was just so lonely. I thought maybe if I wrote to you, you'd come. Maybe if I kept writing, you'd remember me." The tears I had been holding back spilled over, hot and fast. "I failed you," I said, my voice shaking. "I failed you in every way a mother can fail. And I can never make it right. But I want to try. I want to start over, with you, if you'll let me." Frederick looked at me, his eyes wide, searching my face. "Do you mean it?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost like a child asking for reassurance. "You really mean it?" I nodded, unable to say more. The lump in my throat was too big. I reached out a shaking hand, touching his arm gently. "I do, Frederick. I do." Frank stood up, pacing slightly, his hands running through his hair. "This is the hardest thing we've ever done, Mom," he said, his voice raw. "Finding you. Finding Frederick. And now we have to fix everything, somehow. We can't undo the years, but we can start fresh. We can't let this happen again. Not to him. Not to us." I nodded again, my heart heavy with guilt. "I know, Frank. I know." Frederick sat there, silently watching the fish swim in the pond outside, his hands folded neatly in his lap. He was quiet, as if thinking over everything that had just been said. It was as though, in that moment, he was still trying to make sense of the mess of his life. The years that had been taken from him. And the family that had never been there when he needed them most. "I don't know what comes next," Frederick said finally, his voice soft but steady. "But I'm here now. And I'll try. I'll try to make things right, too." I felt a deep sense of relief wash over me, mixed with the heavy realization that no matter how hard I tried, I could never give him back the years he lost. But I could give him something now. A chance to rebuild what had been broken, a chance to find the family that had been kept from him for so long. "Thank you, Frederick," I whispered, the words coming out like a prayer. "Thank you for forgiving me." Frank stepped forward, looking down at his brother. "We're going to help you, Fred. We're going to give you the life you should have had, the life you deserve. No more hiding. No more being forgotten. You're part of this family now, for real." Frederick's eyes softened. "I never thought I'd hear you say that, Frank. Thank you." And in that moment, it felt like a small piece of the weight I had been carrying lifted, even if just for a moment. The past was never going to disappear. The mistakes I had made would haunt me for the rest of my life. But at least, for the first time in years, I had the chance to make a change. To show Frederick that he was never truly forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin healing. The drive back from St. Jude's was quieter than the one there, but not in the same heavy, suffocating way. There was something different in the air now, a fragile sense of hope, a quiet promise that things might one day get better. But even as I tried to hold on to that hope, I knew that healing wasn't going to come easily. Frederick wasn't going to just forget the years he had lost, the years that had been stolen from him. We all sat in the car, the silence stretched between us, but not uncomfortable anymore. It wasn't just about finding Frederick. It was about rebuilding him, rebuilding the life he had lost, and for me, rebuilding the bond one should have had with him all these years. "I don't know how to do this, Mom," Frank said, breaking the silence. "I don't know what to do next. How do we start over? How do we bring him into our lives after everything that's happened?" His words hung in the air, unanswered, as I thought about how much work it would take to even begin to undo the damage. There wasn't a guidebook for this. There were no rules for reconnecting with a son you'd abandoned, no clear path for making up for decades of mistakes. I couldn't pretend that everything would be fine. It wouldn't be. The road ahead was going to be difficult, painful. But at least we were trying. At least we had a chance now. "I don't know either," I finally whispered, my voice tired, thick with emotion. "But we can try. I'll try. I've spent so many years hiding from the truth. Now, I don't want to hide anymore." Frank glanced over at me, his expression unreadable. I could see the anger still there, but there was something else, too. Something softer. Maybe it was the realization that despite everything, I was still his mother. That, despite all the lies, despite the years of abandonment, I was still here, trying to fix it. I know, he said quietly. But it's not just about you trying, Mom. It's about him, too. He's been alone for so long. We can't just push him into everything at once. It's going to take time for him to trust us again, to trust you again. I nodded slowly. Of course, Frank was right. It wasn't just about me showing up now. It was about Frederick learning to trust me again. How could he? I had abandoned him. And, if I were honest with myself, I knew that no matter how many times I apologized, how much I tried to make it right, some wounds would never fully heal. Some things couldn't be undone, but we were starting. And that was all I could give him now. We spent the next few days in a blur of preparations. Frank took the lead, as always. He started making calls, arranging therapy sessions for Frederick, and speaking to doctors about the best way to help him integrate into the life we had. Laura helped, too. With the details, getting his room ready at Frank's house, picking up supplies. Making sure there was enough space for Frederick to feel comfortable, safe. I didn't have the energy to do much. My mind was still racing with the conversations from St. Jude's. With Frederick's words that echoed in my mind, I thought you'd never come. I couldn't stop thinking about how many years I had wasted. How many moments I would never get back. One morning, as Frank and Laura left for work, I stayed behind, sitting in the living room, surrounded by memories of a life that felt both familiar and foreign. It was in these quiet moments that the weight of my actions truly hit me. I had spent so much time running from the past, pretending that everything was fine, that the pain didn't exist. But now, it was all here, laid bare. And there was no running from it anymore. Later that afternoon, I received a call from the St. Jude's director. The results of Frederick's re-entry assessment had come through. His condition was stable, but the transition wouldn't be easy. He would need continuous support, both physically and emotionally. The director mentioned that Frederick's attachment to routine and the institutional environment had made it difficult for him to fully grasp the idea of a normal life. The life he should have had from the beginning. The realization hit me hard. The truth was, I hadn't just abandoned Frederick emotionally. I had taken away his ability to live freely, to grow, to become the person he might have been had I been there for him. And I didn't know if I could fix that, but what I did know was this: I would never leave him again. I would never let him think he was unworthy of love, of family, of a life that was his to live. Frank had made it clear. This was about Frederick. And now, I had to prove to him, prove to myself, that I could be the mother he needed, even if it was late. Even if the damage was deep. The next day, I went to visit Frederick. I didn't know what I would say or how I would act, but I knew I couldn't keep hiding anymore. This was it. This was the chance I had been given, and I was going to take it, no matter how difficult, no matter how painful. I couldn't undo the years. But I could start again. With Frederick, with Frank, with the broken family. I still had a chance to heal. When I arrived at St. Jude's, I found Frederick sitting outside in the garden, his head tilted up toward the sky. I sat down beside him, and for the first time in years, I simply sat. No excuses, no lies, no pretending. Frederick, I said softly, I'm here. I'm really here now. He turned toward me slowly, his eyes a little uncertain but softening. And for the first time, I felt like we might just have a chance. The days following that first visit to St. Jude's passed in a blur of emotion, tension, and quiet resolve. Every time I walked into Frank's house, the weight of everything seemed to hang heavier in the air. We were all trying to adjust, trying to figure out how to build something that felt like a family again, but I knew it would take time, time that felt both endless and too short. Every little change with Frederick felt monumental, like a small victory against the decades of neglect. Frederick was still adjusting to everything. I could see it in his eyes when he would look at something new, like the microwave in the kitchen or the bookshelves in his new room. Simple things that many of us took for granted were foreign to him. When he first stepped into the kitchen and looked at the appliances, he seemed genuinely confused. How does this work? He asked, his voice soft and tentative. It broke my heart to see him struggle, but it also reminded me of how far he had been removed from the world. He hadn't been a part of normal family life for so long. His entire existence had been confined to the sterile walls of St. Jude's, where everything was regimented, predictable, and safe. And now, here he was, in a house full of choices, full of opportunities, full of things he had never had before. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't as simple as just opening the door and letting him walk in. Frederick needed more than just a room in a house. He needed a new world to explore, and I didn't know how to help him navigate it. Frank was determined to make this work. Every day, he spent hours helping Frederick adjust. They'd go out for walks, visit the park, and spend time in the garden. Frank was patient, always speaking calmly, never pushing Frederick too hard. Laura, too, had been incredibly patient. She spent afternoons with him, talking to him about the simplest things: how to use the TV remote, how to make a cup of tea, what the names of the plants in the garden were. Little by little, Frederick started to understand. Slowly, his world began to expand, piece by piece, but it was the small moments that stuck with me the most. The way Frederick's eyes would light up when he made a new discovery, like when he learned how to use the shower on his own or when he realized he could turn the lights on and off without anyone's help. The joy on his face when he went outside and saw the ducks swimming in the pond for the first time, or the way he marveled at the changing seasons. These things most of us took for granted, were new to him. And in those moments, I saw him coming back to life. Coming back to a world he had been kept from for so long, but there was still so much work to be done. Frederick's emotional scars ran deep. Every so often, I would catch him staring off into the distance, as though he was lost in his own thoughts, trying to piece together the broken fragments of his past. Sometimes, he would get up in the middle of the night and walk around the house, unable to sleep. I would find him standing in the living room, his hands pressed against the windowsill, staring out into the dark. He wouldn't say much, just that he couldn't sleep because the sounds were different, because it was too quiet. The therapist Frank had arranged for Frederick had started coming regularly. The sessions were slow, careful. Frederick wasn't used to talking about his past. In fact, he avoided it as much as possible. He'd mention his time at St. Jude's in passing, but never with any detail. He never talked about the things that must have haunted him all those years, about the loneliness, the isolation, the confusion, but sometimes, during those quiet moments, I would hear him mention something. A brief comment. A small glimpse of the pain that still lingered. One afternoon, he sat in the living room, sketching in his notebook, when he said, "When I was at the center, I used to draw a lot. It helped me not feel so lonely. But now, sometimes, I don't know what to draw. It feels hard." I didn't know how to respond at first. How could I respond to that? How could I tell him that I knew all too well what that felt like, being lost, being silenced, being trapped in a life you didn't want, but couldn't escape? "You can draw anything you want now, Frederick," I said, sitting down beside him. "Anything at all. You're free to do whatever you like. The world is yours now." He looked up at me, his eyes soft but uncertain. "I don't know what I want anymore," he said, his voice quiet, almost to himself. "I thought I knew, but now, everything feels different. Everything feels new. And sometimes, that's scary." I nodded, understanding more than I could put into words. "It's okay to feel scared. You've been through a lot, and it's okay to take your time. No one expects you to have it all figured out." He looked at me then, his gaze meeting mine, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. A glimmer of trust. A glimmer of hope. And in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we were finally starting to heal, one small step at a time, but I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The past couldn't be erased. And the wounds Frederick carried would never completely disappear. But as I sat there with him, watching him sketch the outline of a tree, I knew that we had a chance. A chance to rebuild what had been broken. A chance to move forward, even if it was just one step at a time. The days grew longer, the routine starting to feel like a new kind of normal. But even as we found our rhythm, there was always that underlying tension, the weight of the past we were all trying to ignore, hoping it would fade with time. I could see it in Frederick's eyes. Each day, he grew more comfortable with his new life, but there were still moments when he would freeze, his mind drifting back to something he'd rather forget. It wasn't just about relearning how to live in the world. It was about learning how to feel again, how to trust again. I had never known how to be the mother Frederick needed. All these years, I had thought I was protecting him, but now I knew I had only failed him. Each time I looked at him, I was reminded of that failure, the years I had stolen from him. The love I had kept locked away. The guilt that was now a permanent part of me, but there were moments, too, when I saw him smile. When he would sit at the kitchen table, carefully drawing trees and birds, his eyes focused, as though he had finally found a small piece of peace in this new life. I clung to those moments. I had to. They were my reminders that it wasn't all hopeless, that maybe, with enough patience and love, things could be mended. Laura and Frank were doing their best, but I knew it wasn't easy for them either. Laura had always been the patient one, the calm presence in the midst of chaos. But even she had her limits. I saw it in the way she would sometimes glance at me, her lips pressed together tightly, her eyes clouded with frustration. Frank, too, was struggling. He was so caught up in the idea of fixing everything, of making things right, that he was putting immense pressure on himself. He didn't understand that he couldn't fix the years of pain that had already been done. He couldn't just patch things up with a few kind words or good intentions. One evening, after dinner, I sat alone in the living room, watching Frederick as he carefully arranged his drawings. He had been quiet lately, more withdrawn than usual. There was something in the way he held his pencil, the way his eyes focused intently on the paper, that made me uneasy. It was as if he was trying to express something he couldn't put into words. "Frederick," I said softly, not wanting to startle him, "is everything okay?" He didn't look up at first, but after a few seconds, he put his pencil down and met my gaze. His eyes were tired, distant, as though he had been carrying something heavy that he hadn't shared with anyone. "I don't know," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "Sometimes it feels like I'm living someone else's life. Like I don't belong here. I don't belong in this house, with you, with Frank and Laura. Everything feels wrong." The words stung. But I knew they weren't just about the house or the people here. They were about him, the life he had been forced to live. The years he had spent in a place where he didn't belong. And now, even in the freedom he had longed for, he felt lost. "Frederick," I said, my voice shaky, "you belong here. You belong with us. This is your home now, and we're your family. We're not perfect. We're all just trying to figure this out together. But I promise you, you belong here." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze never leaving the floor. Finally, he nodded, but I could tell that the words didn't quite reach him. He wanted to believe them, I could see that, but the wounds ran too deep. They couldn't be healed with promises or reassurances. Not yet. "I know, Mom," he said softly. "But it's hard. It's so hard to trust that it's real. To trust that you're not going to leave me again." My heart broke at the rawness in his voice. I wanted to reach out and hold him, to make him understand that I wasn't going anywhere, that this time, I would fight for him. But the truth was, I wasn't sure if he could ever truly trust me again. I wasn't sure if I would ever fully deserve that trust. The next few days were filled with small victories. Frederick began going out more, walking in the park, visiting the local library. He was tentative at first, unsure of himself in this new world, but each time he came back with a smile on his face, I knew that he was beginning to find his place. But there were still moments when the old pain would surface. Moments when he would withdraw into himself. Lost in the memories of a past that had defined him for so long. Frank and Laura were doing everything they could to help him. But I could see the strain on their faces, the fatigue in their eyes. They didn't say much about it, but I could feel it. And I knew they were all waiting for me to prove myself, for me to show that I could be the mother Frederick needed. I could see it in their glances, in the way they would step back when I tried to talk to Frederick, as though they were waiting for me to mess up, waiting for me to fail again. And I understood why. I had failed them all. But I wouldn't give up. I couldn't point. One night, after Frederick had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. It wasn't just the silence that hurt. It was the knowledge that the damage had been done. That there were things I could never take back. But I had to keep going. I had to keep trying, for Frederick, for Frank, and for myself. The road ahead was still uncertain. The future was still filled with unknowns. But in that moment, I made a promise to myself, to Frederick, to everyone I loved. I would not give up on him again. This time, I would stay. And I would fight, no matter how long it took. The days that followed felt like I was walking on a tightrope, balancing between hope and fear. Frederick was showing progress, but every small victory came with its own set of challenges. It was as if every step forward had to be earned with 10 steps of doubt and uncertainty. He had started to venture out more, visiting the park, spending time in the garden, even taking trips to the local grocery store. But even the smallest of tasks, like choosing what to buy or deciding what to eat, seemed like monumental decisions for him. His anxiety, though lessening, was still very much present. I could see the change in him. His smile was more genuine now, his voice more confident. But there was always that quiet retreat when things got too overwhelming, that moment when the world outside seemed too much. It was in those moments I realized how deep his wounds ran. How much of himself he had locked away in order to survive. He had spent decades in a place where his worth was defined by his illness. His behavior controlled by a system that did not understand him. It was a Saturday afternoon when Frank asked me to accompany him and Frederick to the local art gallery for the first time. Frank had been encouraging Frederick to share his art with the world, to take small steps out of the shadows and into a life that was truly his. He thought that showing Frederick the art of others might inspire him, give him confidence to pursue his own passions without fear. I was nervous. I could feel the anxiety building in my chest as we drove to the gallery. Even though I wanted to support Frederick, I couldn't help but worry about how he would handle being around strangers, how he would react to the unfamiliar noise, the crowd, the bright lights. It was the kind of place he had never been, and I wasn't sure if he was ready. When we arrived, Frederick was quiet, his eyes scanning the surroundings with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. I could see the tension in his shoulders as he stepped through the entrance. Frank walked beside him, offering words of encouragement, but I could sense Frederick's hesitation. "Do you want to look around?" Frank asked, guiding him gently toward the first exhibit. Frederick nodded, though his body remained stiff. "Yeah, I think so. I don't know if I'll understand it." "That's okay," Frank replied, giving him a reassuring smile. "You don't need to understand everything. Just look at what feels interesting to you." As we wandered through the gallery, I watched Frederick closely. He was drawn to the abstract paintings, the colors, the boldness of the brushstrokes. He stood in front of one piece for several minutes, his brow furrowed as he took in the details. There was something about the way he observed the art that made me realize how much he had been starved for beauty, for expression. His world had been so small for so long, confined by walls, rules, and expectations, and now he was free to explore, to feel again. He turned to me after a long pause. His face lit with something that resembled excitement. "This is beautiful, isn't it?" I smiled, my heart swelling with a mix of pride and tenderness. "Yes, it really is. It's amazing to see you connect with it like this, Frederick." For a moment, I saw the boy he might have been, the one who could have grown up surrounded by love, by family, by opportunity. The one who had been robbed of his childhood. But now, he was beginning to reclaim it. Piece by piece. Later, as we stood by the window, watching the crowd mingle and admire the artwork, Frederick seemed quieter than before. His eyes were distant again, his hand clenching and unclenching. I could see the uncertainty creeping back into him. I don't belong here," he murmured, almost to himself. "I'm not like them. I'm different." I felt a pang of sadness for him, knowing exactly what he meant. He was right, in a way. He was different, but not in the way he thought. He wasn't damaged or broken. He wasn't less than anyone else. The world had simply told him he was, and for too long, he had believed it. "You belong here, Frederick," I said softly, stepping closer to him. "You belong just as much as anyone else. You've always belonged. You just had to find your way back." He looked at me then, his eyes uncertain but soft, and for the first time, I felt like maybe he was starting to believe it. That maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to believe in his own worth again. Frank smiled, seeing the exchange. "Let's get some coffee," he said. "We can sit and talk about the pieces you liked the most." As we left the gallery, I could see that Frederick was still processing everything. He had started to engage, to open up, but there was still a long road ahead. The self-doubt, the lingering fears, the overwhelming weight of his past, it wasn't something that would go away overnight. But with each step forward, with each new experience, he was starting to find himself again. He was starting to understand that he wasn't just the sum of his past mistakes and trauma. He was more than that. He was a person, a whole person, with his own dreams and his own voice. That evening, after dinner, Frederick sat down at the kitchen table with his sketchbook. The pencil moved slowly at first, unsure of itself, but soon the lines began to take shape. He was drawing a tree, his favorite subject, something that had always been part of his art since he was a child. Watching him, I knew that the healing wasn't going to be easy. It wouldn't be a straight line. But in that moment, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Hope that we could start over, that we could rebuild. And that, despite everything, there was still a chance for us to be the family we were meant to be. The first few weeks with Frederick living at Frank's were the hardest. Not just for him, but for all of us. It felt like we were walking on eggshells, careful not to break the fragile peace we had finally achieved. There were days when I felt like a stranger in my own home, unsure of how to act, how to make things right. The weight of my past mistakes seemed to hang over every conversation, every interaction, but there were moments, small, fleeting moments, that told me we were getting somewhere. One afternoon, I found Frederick sitting on the couch, flipping through an old photo album I had left out on the coffee table. He didn't look up when I walked into the room. But I could see him studying the pictures with great interest. His finger tracing the edges of the photos as if trying to piece together a past he had never truly been a part of. I hesitated before sitting down beside him, unsure of whether it was the right time to talk. But then I saw it, the faintest hint of a smile as he glanced at a picture of Frank and me from when we were younger. It was a snapshot from a summer day, a family picnic, when everything seemed perfect. We were laughing, carefree, and in that moment, I realized how much I had missed out on. I was in that picture, Frederick said, his voice soft, almost to himself. How come I don't remember? I swallowed hard, the question breaking me. Because I kept you away from all of this. From all of us. He didn't say anything for a while, just continued flipping through the pages. The silence between us wasn't awkward, at least, not for me. It felt like we were both trying to come to terms with the broken pieces of our lives, unsure of how to put them back together. Eventually, Frederick closed the album and turned to me. "Do you think it's too late for me to have a life with you guys?" he asked, his voice quiet but tinged with vulnerability. "Is it too late to be part of the family?" The weight of his words hit me like a tidal wave. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes as I looked at him. He had asked that question so gently, so honestly, like he wasn't sure whether he was allowed to hope for something he hadn't had in so long. "No, Frederick," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "It's never too late. You're here now, and that's all that matters. You've always been a part of this family, even if I couldn't show you that before." He nodded slowly, absorbing my words as if they were a lifeline. "I want to believe that. I really do. But sometimes I feel like I'm still not really here. Like I'm just waiting for something." I put my arm around him, pulling him closer. "We're all figuring this out together, Frederick. And I know it's not easy. But we're here for you. I'm here for you. And I'm never leaving again. Not this time." For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. And that was enough. The next few days passed in a blur of routine. Frank and I continued to work together to help Frederick adjust, giving him space but also pushing him to take more steps outside his comfort zone. We helped him navigate the outside world again, one small step at a time, from ordering food at a restaurant to going for walks in the neighborhood. Each time, I could see the growth in him, the tentative spark of confidence flickering in his eyes, but even as Frederick began to open up, I knew there were more challenges ahead. The road to rebuilding trust would be long. And as much as I wanted to fix everything right away, I knew that healing took time. That night, after dinner, as Frederick sat at the table, sketching in his notebook, Frank and I exchanged a quiet look. We didn't need to speak to understand each other. We both knew that this was just the beginning. But for the first time, we also knew that it wasn't too late. It might take time, it might be difficult, but we were willing to do whatever it took to give Frederick the life he deserved, and in that moment, I allowed myself to hope. To believe that, maybe, after all the pain, after all the lies, there could still be a future for us. A future built on truth, forgiveness, and love. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be days when I would question whether I was enough, whether the wounds could ever fully heal. But for now, I was here. And so was Frederick. That, at least, was a start.